The morning sun cast long shadows across the polished marble floors of Buckingham Palace as King Charles III prepared for what would become one of the most difficult days of his reign. Senior Protection Officer James Mitchell had been assigned to the royal household for over 15 years, but nothing in his extensive training had prepared him for what he would witness behind the closed doors of the royal residence. That Tuesday morning in late October, Charles had been experiencing increasing fatigue over the past several weeks, though he had insisted on maintaining his demanding schedule of public engagements and state duties. Palace physicians had been quietly monitoring his condition, but the king remained determined to fulfill his responsibilities to the crown and the Commonwealth. His dedication to duty, instilled from childhood, would not allow him to show any signs of weakness in public. The first indication that something was seriously wrong came during the king's private breakfast meeting with his private secretary. Officer Mitchell was stationed outside the oak room when he heard the distinctive sound of a chair scraping against the floor, followed by an unusual silence that made his trained instincts immediately alert. Years of protecting the royal family had taught him to recognize the subtle changes in atmosphere that often preceded dangerous situations. Queen Camilla had arrived at the palace early that morning, having spent the previous evening at Clarence House, attending to personal correspondence. She was dressed elegantly in a navy blue suit, her pearl necklace catching the morning light as she walked through the corridors with her usual composed dignity. Palace staff, who encountered her that morning later, remarked that she seemed particularly cheerful, discussing plans for an upcoming charity gala with her. Lady in waiting. The king's schedule that day included a meeting with the Prime Minister, followed by a ceremony honoring military veterans, and an evening reception for visiting Commonwealth representatives. Each event had been carefully planned months in advance, with security protocols thoroughly reviewed and diplomatic considerations meticulously arranged. The weight of these responsibilities, combined with his ongoing health concerns, had been creating mounting pressure that Charles had been struggling to manage privately inside the oak room. Charles had been reviewing briefing papers when the first wave of dizziness struck. He gripped the edge of the mahogany table, hoping the sensation would pass quickly as it had during previous episodes. However, this time was different. The room began to spin more violently, and he felt a crushing pain in his chest that made it difficult to breathe. His vision started to blur, and despite his efforts to maintain control, he realized he was losing consciousness. Officer Mitchell's years of experience had taught him to trust his instincts completely. The unusual silence from the oak room, combined with the fact that the scheduled meeting should have been generating normal conversation sounds, prompted him to take immediate action. Following security protocols, he knocked gently on the door and announced his presence, but received no response. His training dictated that he should enter immediately if there was any possibility of danger to the monarch. When Mitchell opened the door, he discovered King Charles collapsed on the Persian carpet beside his chair, unconscious and pale. The briefing papers were scattered around him, and his reading glasses had fallen several feet away. The officer immediately activated his emergency communication device while rushing to check the king's vital signs. His training in emergency medical response kicked in automatically as he began assessing the situation and calling for immediate medical assistance. The palace medical team, led by Dr. Sarah Henderson, arrived within minutes of Mitchell's emergency call. They had been on standby duty in the medical suite, located just 2 floors below the oak room. As was standard protocol whenever the king was in residence, Dr. Henderson quickly assessed Charles's condition while her team prepared emergency equipment and established communication with the nearest hospital's cardiac unit. Meanwhile, Officer Mitchell had the difficult task of immediately notifying Queen Camilla of the emergency. Palace protocol required that she be informed before any other family members, and the news had to be delivered with both urgency and sensitivity. He found her in the green drawing room, where she was reviewing seating arrangements for the evening reception with the master of the household. The moment Camilla saw Mitchell's grave expression and heard his request for private conversation, she understood that something serious had occurred. Her years as a member of the royal family had prepared her for many challenges, but the possibility of losing Charles had always remained her deepest fear. When Mitchell carefully explained what had happened, Describing the king's collapse and current medical treatment, her initial reaction was one of controlled panic, mixed with immediate practical concern. What happened next would become the subject of intense discussion among palace staff for months afterward. Rather than rushing immediately to Charles's side as everyone expected, Camilla's first question was about who else knew about the incident and whether any media outlets had been alerted. Her second concern was about the scheduled events for that day and how the king's absence would be explained. Two waiting dignitaries and press representatives, Mitchell, later confided to a trusted colleague that he had expected the Queen to demand immediate access to her husband or to break down emotionally. Upon hearing the news, instead, Camilla's response was remarkably calculated and focused on managing the public relations aspects of the crisis. She asked detailed questions about the medical team's assessment, the likelihood of recovery, and most surprisingly, whether the collapse could be kept completely confidential. The medical team worked efficiently to stabilize Charles's condition, while Camilla made a series of phone calls from the Oak Room's adjacent private office. Palace staff could hear her speaking in hushed but authoritative tones, apparently coordinating with various officials about managing the day's schedule and controlling information flow. Her ability to maintain composure and focus on institutional concerns during such a personal crisis surprised even veteran palace employees who had witnessed many royal emergencies over the years. As the morning progressed and Charles's condition slowly improved under medical care, the true complexity of the situation began to emerge. The palace faced the challenge of maintaining normal operations while dealing with a medical emergency that could have constitutional implications if it became public knowledge. Camilla's initial reaction, which had seemed cold to some observers, was actually revealing her deep understanding of the delicate balance between personal crisis and public responsibility that defines royal life. Dr. Sarah Henderson had served as one of the royal physicians for 8 years, but she had never faced a situation quite like this. As she monitored King Charles's vital signs in the makeshift medical area that had been quickly established in the Oak Room, she was acutely aware that every decision she made could have far-reaching consequences for the monarchy and the nation. The king's blood pressure had stabilized, but his heart rhythm remained irregular, suggesting that immediate hospitalization might be necessary. Queen Camilla had been observing the medical proceedings from across the room, her face maintaining the composed expression that had become her signature during years of public appearances. However, Officer Mitchell noticed subtle signs of stress that most people would miss: the way she repeatedly adjusted her pearl necklace, the slight tremor in her hands when she reached for her mobile phone, and the careful way she measured each word before speaking. The first major decision facing the royal household was whether to transport Charles to a hospital or attempt to treat him within the palace walls. Dr. Henderson explained to Camilla that while the palace medical facilities were excellent, the king's condition might require specialized cardiac equipment that was only available at major hospitals. This created an immediate dilemma about maintaining secrecy, as any movement of the monarch to a medical facility would be nearly impossible to hide from the ever-present media. Camilla's response to this medical recommendation shocked Dr. Henderson and the security team present in the room. Instead of immediately agreeing to whatever treatment the king needed, she began asking detailed questions about alternative options that would allow them to keep the incident completely private. She inquired about bringing hospital equipment to the palace, arranging for specialist doctors to visit discreetly, and even suggested that they could claim Charles was suffering from a minor illness if hospitalization became absolutely necessary. The medical team exchanged concerned glances as Camilla continued to prioritize secrecy over what might be optimal medical care for her husband. Dr. Henderson, gently but firmly, explained that the king's health must be the primary consideration. Regardless of public relations concerns, she emphasized that any delay in proper treatment could result in more serious complications that might be life-threatening. Meanwhile, palace staff throughout the building had begun to sense that something unusual was happening. The king's scheduled meeting with the prime minister had been quietly postponed with only 30 minutes' notice. using the excuse of unexpected schedule adjustments. The military veterans who were meant to be honored at the afternoon ceremony were told that the event was being temporarily delayed due to unforeseen circumstances. Officer Mitchell found himself in the unprecedented position of coordinating security for a medical emergency while simultaneously helping to maintain an elaborate deception. His training had covered many scenarios, but managing the delicate balance between protecting the monarch's health and protecting state secrets was proving exceptionally challenging. He had to ensure that only essential personnel knew about Charles's condition while maintaining normal security operations throughout the rest of the palace. The king began to regain consciousness around mid-morning. Though he remained weak and disoriented, his first words were reportedly asking about his scheduled appointments, demonstrating the deep sense of duty that had defined his entire life. Dr. Henderson advised him to remain still and avoid any stress while they continued monitoring his condition. But Charles immediately began expressing concern about the disruption. His illness was causing too official business. Camilla's demeanor changed noticeably once Charles was conscious and able to speak. She moved closer to his side and took his hand, finally displaying the emotional warmth that palace staff had expected to see from the beginning of the crisis. However, her first conversation with her recovering husband focused primarily on discussing how to manage the public explanation of his absence rather than expressing relief about his improving condition. The royal couple had a whispered conference that lasted nearly 20 minutes, during which they apparently discussed various strategies for maintaining their public schedule while accommodating Charles's medical needs. Palace staff who were present later described feeling uncomfortable about witnessing what seemed to be a business meeting rather than a tender moment between husband and wife during a health scare. Dr. Henderson's medical assessment indicated that Charles had experienced what appeared to be a combination of exhaustion, stress, and possibly a minor cardiac event that required ongoing monitoring. She recommended that he should rest for at least several days and avoid any strenuous activities or high-stress situations. This medical advice created immediate complications for the royal schedule, which included several important engagements that could not be easily postponed or canceled. The afternoon brought additional challenges as palace communications staff struggled to explain the sudden changes to the day's planned events without revealing the true reason. Press Secretary Amanda Williams found herself crafting carefully worded statements about minor scheduling adjustments and brief delays due to administrative matters, while knowing that any inconsistencies might trigger media investigation. Officer Mitchell observed a particularly revealing moment when Camilla received a phone call from Prince William, who had apparently heard rumors about unusual activity at the palace. Rather than explaining the truth about his father's health emergency, she told William that Charles was dealing with some minor administrative issues that required his immediate attention. The decision to mislead even close family members about the king's condition seemed to surprise the security personnel who overheard the conversation by late afternoon. Charles's condition had stabilized enough that Dr. Henderson felt comfortable allowing him to rest in his private chambers rather than requiring immediate hospitalization. However, she insisted that he needed complete rest and should avoid any official duties for at least the remainder of the week. This medical recommendation would require significant adjustments to the royal calendar and careful coordination to maintain the appearance of normal operations. The evening brought new complications, as foreign dignitaries who had been scheduled to attend the Commonwealth reception began arriving in London. Palace staff had to quickly organize alternative entertainment while maintaining the fiction that nothing unusual was happening. The master of the household worked frantically to arrange substitute hosts and modified programs that would satisfy diplomatic requirements. Without requiring the king's presence, Camilla spent much of the evening in meetings with senior palace officials, discussing long-term strategies for managing Charles's health issues while maintaining his public image and royal duties. These discussions revealed a level of strategic thinking about monarchy management that impressed some staff members while troubling others who felt that personal concern should have taken precedence over institutional considerations, the day concluded, with Charles resting comfortably but under strict medical supervision. While Camilla had successfully orchestrated a complex cover-up that prevented any public knowledge of the health crisis, however, the methods she had used and the priorities she had displayed during the emergency had created tension among palace staff and raised questions about the balance between personal relationships and institutional responsibilities within the modern monarchy. The following morning brought new revelations about the extent of Queen Camilla's crisis management as palace staff began to understand the full scope of the previous day's cover-up operation. Officer Mitchell arrived for his early shift to discover that overnight, additional security personnel had been quietly briefed about maintaining absolute confidentiality regarding any unusual events they might have observed. The level of organization involved in maintaining secrecy was beginning to concern some veteran palace employees. Dr. Henderson returned to check on King Charles's progress and found him in better spirits. Though still weak and requiring continued monitoring, during her examination, she learned from the king himself that he had been experiencing similar but less severe episodes for several weeks before the major collapse. This information troubled her significantly, as it suggested that his condition might be more serious than initially assessed and that previous warning signs had potentially been ignored or downplayed. The revelation that Charles had been hiding recurring health issues created additional tension between the medical team and the royal couple's management of the situation. Dr. Henderson felt that she should have been informed about the earlier episodes, as this information was crucial for providing proper medical care and preventing future emergencies. When she raised this concern with the king, he admitted that he had been reluctant to worry anyone or disrupt his official duties. Camilla's role in managing information flow became even more apparent when Dr. Henderson requested permission to consult with cardiac specialists about the king's condition. Rather than immediately agreeing to additional medical expertise, Camilla insisted on personally approving any outside medical professionals who might be involved in Charles's care. Her primary concern seemed to be ensuring that any specialists could be trusted to maintain complete discretion about their royal patient. The Queen's approach to managing the health crisis was creating divisions among palace staff who had different perspectives on their professional responsibilities. Some admired her decisive leadership and ability to protect the monarchy's interests during a vulnerable time. Others felt uncomfortable with the way medical decisions seemed to be influenced by public relations considerations. Rather than purely focusing on the king's health needs, Officer Mitchell found himself observing interactions between the royal couple that revealed the complexity of their relationship during this stressful period. When they thought they were alone, Charles expressed frustration about being unable to fulfill his duties, while Camilla's responses focused primarily on discussing strategies for maintaining their public image. Their conversations seemed more like business meetings between colleagues than intimate exchanges between a worried wife and a recovering husband. The challenge of maintaining normal palace operations while hiding the king's condition required increasingly elaborate deceptions. Staff members were instructed to continue preparing for Charles's scheduled engagements, while simultaneously being told that these events might be canceled at short notice for unexplained reasons. This created confusion and stress among employees who were trying to do their jobs effectively while being kept in the dark. About important information, Press Secretary Amanda Williams was facing mounting pressure from media outlets who had noticed unusual patterns in the royal schedule. Several journalists had begun asking specific questions about the king's health after observing the sudden cancellation of multiple public appearances. Williams found herself crafting increasingly creative explanations that skirted the truth without technically lying, a task that was becoming more difficult as more people began asking questions. The most shocking revelation came when Officer Mitchell overheard a phone conversation between Camilla and one of her close personal advisors. During this conversation, She discussed potential scenarios for managing public information if Charles's condition worsened significantly. The conversation included detailed discussion about succession planning and the constitutional implications of various health scenarios, topics that seemed premature and coldly calculated given that the king was showing signs of recovery. Dr. Henderson's ongoing medical assessment revealed that while Charles was improving, he would need weeks or possibly months of reduced activity to fully recover from what appeared to be stress-related health issues. This prognosis created immediate problems for the royal calendar, which included several major events that could not be easily postponed. The medical team recommended a gradual return to duties with significantly reduced stress levels, advice that conflicted with the institutional demands of monarchy. Camilla's response to the medical recommendations continued to prioritize institutional concerns over health considerations. She began developing elaborate plans for Charles to make carefully managed public appearances that would maintain the impression of normal operations while accommodating his medical limitations. These plans included using body doubles for some events, strategic camera angles to hide signs of fatigue, and shortened appearances that could be extended through creative editing and media management. The complexity of these deception strategies troubled several senior staff members who felt that they were being asked to participate in potentially harmful cover-ups. Palace traditions emphasized duty and discretion, but some employees questioned whether maintaining absolute secrecy about the king's health was in the best interests of either Charles personally or the monarchy as an institution. Meanwhile, other members of the royal family remained largely unaware of the true extent of Charles's health crisis. Prince William had accepted Camilla's explanation about administrative issues, and other family members had not been informed about the collapse at all. This decision to exclude close relatives from important information about the king's health created additional ethical concerns among palace staff who witnessed the ongoing deception. The afternoon brought a particularly concerning development when Charles attempted to return to some of his lighter duties against Dr. Henderson's medical advice. Camilla supported his decision to gradually resume activities, arguing that maintaining normal appearances was essential for the stability of the monarchy. This disagreement between medical recommendations and royal preferences highlighted the ongoing tension between health concerns and institutional responsibilities. Officer Mitchell observed several private meetings between Camilla and various palace officials throughout the day, during which they discussed long-term strategies for managing similar situations in the future. These conversations suggested that the Queen was treating the current crisis as a learning experience for developing better crisis management protocols rather than focusing on preventing future health emergencies through lifestyle changes. The day concluded with Charles having successfully completed a brief private meeting with government officials, an achievement that Camilla celebrated as proof that their management approach was working effectively. However, Dr. Henderson noted subtle signs that the king was still struggling with fatigue and stress, suggesting that the push to return to normal activities might be premature and potentially harmful to his recovery. The growing web of secrecy and deception surrounding the king's health had created a complex situation where institutional interests, personal relationships, and medical considerations were in constant tension. Palace staff were beginning to question whether the current approach was sustainable and whether the focus on maintaining appearances might ultimately prove more damaging than being honest about the challenges facing the monarchy. By the third day following King Charles's collapse, the strain of maintaining the elaborate deception was beginning to show among palace staff at every level. Officer Mitchell had noticed increased tension during shift changes, as security personnel struggled with conflicting loyalties between their duty to protect the monarch and their growing discomfort with the extensive cover-up operation that Queen Camilla had orchestrated. Dr. Henderson arrived that morning with serious concerns about the king's continued recovery. While his vital signs had stabilized, she had observed troubling signs that suggested he was not getting the complete rest that his condition required. During the night, Palace staff had reported hearing movement from the king's private study, indicating that he was attempting to work despite strict medical advice to avoid all stressful activities. The discovery that Charles was secretly continuing to handle official business during his supposed recovery period created a direct confrontation between Dr. Henderson and Queen Camilla. The doctor insisted that any work-related activities could seriously compromise the king's health and potentially trigger another more severe episode. Camilla's response revealed the depth of her commitment to maintaining royal operations above all other considerations, including her husband's medical needs. During this heated but quietly conducted argument, Camilla explained her philosophy that the monarchy's stability depended on the appearance of continuous, competent leadership. She argued that allowing any perception of weakness or incapacity could create constitutional crises and undermine public confidence in the institution. Her position was that careful management of Charles's activities was preferable to complete transparency about his health. Limitations Officer Mitchell found himself in an increasingly difficult position as he observed the ongoing conflict between medical advice and royal protocol. His security training emphasized protecting the monarch from all threats, but he was beginning to question whether the greatest threat to King Charles's well-being was coming from within the palace itself. The pressure to maintain secrecy was creating an environment where the king's actual needs were secondary to institutional image management. The fourth day brought unexpected complications when Prince William made an unannounced visit to Buckingham Palace. Apparently concerned about rumors he had been hearing from other royal family members and friends, Camilla was forced to orchestrate an elaborate performance to convince William that his father was simply dealing with routine administrative matters rather than recovering from a serious health crisis. The meeting between Charles, Camilla, and William took place in the blue drawing room, with the king making a determined effort to appear healthy and energetic despite his ongoing weakness. Palace staff later described watching this performance with a mixture of admiration for Charles's dedication and concern about the physical and emotional toll of maintaining such deceptions. The king's commitment to duty was evident, but so was the cost of denying his human limitations. William's visit revealed additional layers of complexity in the royal family's internal dynamics. During private conversations with palace staff, he expressed subtle concerns about his father's appearance and energy levels, suggesting that the deception was not entirely successful. However, his respect for royal protocol prevented him from directly challenging the explanations he was being given, creating a situation where family members were being kept apart by institutional formality. Dr. Henderson's medical concerns continued to mount as she observed the king struggling to maintain normal appearances while dealing with ongoing health issues. She began to document her recommendations and the royal couple's responses in detailed medical records, apparently recognizing that the situation might eventually require professional accountability for the medical decisions being made. Under palace pressure, the most revealing moment came during an ASON emergency meeting called by Camilla to address growing media speculation about changes in the royal schedule. During this meeting, attended by senior palace officials, press staff, and security personnel, the Queen demonstrated her sophisticated understanding of public perception management. She outlined detailed strategies for gradually adjusting public expectations about the king's schedule while maintaining the fiction that nothing significant had changed. Camilla's presentation included plans for strategic health updates that would prepare the public for reduced royal appearances without revealing the extent of Charles's current difficulties. She proposed announcing routine health checkups and preventive medical care as explanations for future schedule modifications. Her approach was professionally impressive but personally troubling to staff members who witnessed her clinical detachment from her husband's actual suffering. The meeting also revealed that Camilla had been consulting with external public relations experts about crisis management strategies, apparently without involving the traditional palace communications team in these discussions. This discovery created additional tension among long-serving palace employees who felt that their expertise and loyalty were being undervalued in favor of outside consultants with no deep understanding of royal traditions. Officer Mitchell observed a particularly disturbing incident when the king experienced another brief dizzy spell during a private meeting with government officials. Rather than stopping the meeting to attend to Charles's health needs, Camilla quickly intervened to redirect the conversation and minimize attention to her husband's obvious discomfort. The officials appeared not to notice the king's struggle, but Mitchell was troubled by what seemed like prioritizing business over basic human care. The psychological toll of the ongoing deception was becoming evident in Charles himself, who appeared increasingly isolated and burdened by the weight of maintaining appearances. Palace staff noticed that he was becoming more withdrawn and seemed to be struggling with the conflict between his desire to fulfill his duties and his body's need for recovery. The situation was creating emotional stress that could potentially worsen his physical condition. Evening brought another crisis when foreign diplomats scheduled to meet with the king the following day began asking specific questions about protocol, changes they had heard about through unofficial channels. The palace communications team was forced to create increasingly elaborate explanations for modifications to traditional procedures, explanations that were becoming difficult to coordinate and maintain. Corntantle made a final attempt to convince the royal couple that complete honesty about the king's health challenges would be less risky than continuing the current deception strategy. She argued that controlling the narrative through truthful disclosure would be more effective than trying to hide information that was becoming increasingly difficult to conceal. Her medical and practical arguments were logical, but they conflicted with Camilla's fundamental belief that weakness could not be shown publicly. The day concluded with Charles making another effort to participate in official duties, this time hosting a private dinner for Commonwealth representatives. The event was carefully managed to minimize stress and physical demands, but observers noted that the king appeared strained and tired throughout the evening. Camilla's performance as the supportive wife was flawless in public, but staff members continued to observe the calculating way she managed every detail to maintain the desired public impression. The growing complexity of the cover-up operation was requiring more people to participate in the deception, creating risks that information might leak despite everyone's best efforts. Palace staff were beginning to question whether the current approach could continue indefinitely and what the consequences might be if the truth about the king's health crisis eventually became public knowledge, despite all their careful management efforts. 1 week after King Charles's initial collapse, the carefully constructed facade that Queen Camilla had built around the health crisis began showing dangerous cracks. Officer Mitchell arrived for his morning shift to find unusual activity in the palace, with senior staff members engaged in hushed conversations that stopped abruptly when other people approached. The atmosphere suggested that something significant had happened overnight, but the official schedule remained unchanged. Dr. Henderson's morning examination of the king revealed troubling developments that she could no longer ignore in the interest of maintaining palace secrecy. Charles had experienced another episode during the night, though this one had been less severe than the original collapse. However, the pattern of recurring symptoms suggested that his underlying condition was not improving as quickly as Camilla had been publicly suggesting through carefully managed appearances. The most significant development came when Dr. Henderson discovered that the king had been taking medication to help him appear more energetic during public appearances, medication that had been obtained without proper medical supervision.
All this
revelation created immediate concern about potential drug interactions and the risk of masking serious symptoms that required medical attention. The doctor's anger about this dangerous practice led to the most serious confrontation yet between medical professionals and royal protocol. Camilla's response to Dr. Henderson's concerns revealed the extent to which she was willing to prioritize public image over health considerations. When confronted about the unauthorized medication, she argued that the king's duty to the nation required him to appear strong and capable, regardless of his personal physical limitations. Her position was that royal obligations transcended ordinary health concerns and that creative medical management was preferable to public disclosure of weakness. The argument between Dr. Henderson and Queen Camilla escalated to the point where other palace staff could hear raised voices from behind closed doors. An unprecedented breach of royal household protocol. Officer Mitchell and other security personnel found themselves in the uncomfortable position of witnessing a fundamental conflict between professional medical ethics and royal institutional demands, with no clear guidance about their own responsibilities in such a situation. The crisis deepened when Prince William unexpectedly returned to the palace with his wife Catherine. Apparently having heard concerning reports from palace staff who were struggling with their conflicting loyalties, his visit forced Camilla to orchestrate another elaborate performance to convince the younger royals that everything was under control. Despite growing evidence that the situation was becoming increasingly unstable, during William and Catherine's visit, palace staff observed a revealing family dynamic that highlighted the isolation Charles was experiencing. While Camilla dominated conversations about the king's schedule and responsibilities, Charles himself appeared disconnected and exhausted. His interactions with his son and daughter-in-law seemed strained, suggesting that the stress of maintaining deceptions was affecting his relationships with family members who were being kept in the dark about his condition. The most shocking revelation came when Officer Mitchell discovered that Camilla had been secretly recording conversations with Dr. Henderson, apparently as protection against potential future criticism of her handling of the health crisis. This discovery raised serious questions about trust and professional ethics within the palace environment, and created additional tension among staff members who realized that their own conversations might also be subject to surveillance. Dr. Henderson's response to learning about the secret recordings was to threaten resignation unless she was given complete authority over the king's medical care without interference from public relations considerations. Her ultimatum created a crisis within the crisis, as losing the royal physician at this critical time would create additional problems while potentially exposing the extent of Charles's health issues to outside medical professionals who might be less willing to maintain secrecy. The afternoon brought news that international media outlets were beginning to investigate rumors about changes in the British royal household's operations. Journalists in several countries had noticed patterns in schedule modifications and were starting to ask specific questions about the king's recent public appearances. The palace communications team was struggling to maintain consistent explanations while dealing with increasingly sophisticated media inquiries. Camilla's response to the growing media pressure was to double down on her deception strategy rather than consider more transparent alternatives. She organized a carefully choreographed public appearance for Charles that was designed to definitively prove his good health and put an end to speculation. However, the physical and emotional toll of preparing for this performance was evident. Two palace staff who watched the king struggle to meet the demands being placed on him. The public appearance took place at a charity event that had been specifically chosen because it would allow for controlled conditions and limited interaction with unpredictable elements. Charles's performance was professionally adequate, but observers who knew him well could see signs of strain and fatigue that suggested his condition was still far from normal. The event succeeded in temporarily quieting media speculation, but at considerable cost to the king's ongoing recovery. Behind the scenes, the charity event revealed additional concerning aspects of Camilla's crisis management approach. Staff noticed that she had arranged for the king to be photographed only from certain angles that would minimize any signs of illness, and that his interactions with charity representatives were carefully timed to avoid prolonged conversations that might reveal his weakness. The level of manipulation involved in creating the desired public impression was remarkable but deeply troubling. The most disturbing development came when Officer Mitchell overheard Camilla discussing contingency plans for more serious health scenarios with her private advisors. These conversations included detailed consideration of how to maintain royal operations if Charles became completely incapacitated, discussions that seemed to anticipate his potential death or a permanent disability rather than focusing on his recovery. The clinical nature of these planning sessions shocked staff members, who expected more emotional concern for the king's well-being. Dr. Henderson's continued. Monitoring revealed that the stress of maintaining public appearances was actually hindering Charles's recovery rather than providing the stability that Camilla claimed was necessary. The medical evidence clearly indicated that the king needed extended rest and reduced stress, recommendations that directly contradicted the institutional demands being placed on him by his wife's crisis. Management strategy. The day concluded with Charles collapsing again in his private chambers, though this episode was less severe than the original incident. However, the pattern of recurring symptoms suggested that the underlying health issues were not being properly addressed due to the conflicting priorities that dominated palace decision-making. Dr. Henderson's growing frustration with the situation was becoming evident to everyone who worked closely with the royal household. Palace staffs were beginning to divide into factions based on their views about the proper balance between institutional loyalty and personal concern for the king's welfare. Some supported Camilla's approach as necessary for protecting the monarchy's stability, while others believed that the deception was ultimately more harmful than honest disclosure would be. These divisions were creating additional stress within the palace environment at a time when unity and clear thinking were most needed. 2 weeks after the initial collapse, the unsustainable nature of Queen Camilla's elaborate cover-up operation finally reached a breaking point that would forever change how palace staff viewed the royal marriage and the Queen's approach to crisis management. Officer Mitchell arrived for what he assumed would be another day of carefully orchestrated deceptions, only to discover that the situation had dramatically escalated overnight in ways that no amount of planning could have anticipated. Dr. Henderson had reached her limit with the ongoing interference in medical decision-making and formally submitted her resignation to the palace administration, citing ethical concerns about the treatment of the king's health crisis. Her departure would have created immediate problems for Charles's ongoing care, but more importantly, it threatened to expose the entire cover-up operation if she chose to discuss her experiences with outside medical colleagues or media representatives. Crisis deepened when Prince William arrived at the palace unannounced, accompanied by his private secretary and a trusted aide, demanding immediate answers about rumors that had reached him through multiple sources within the royal household. Palace staff, who had been struggling with divided loyalties, had apparently begun sharing information with other members of the royal family, creating the very security breach that Camilla had been working so desperately to prevent. Camilla's response to these converging challenges revealed the full extent of her willingness to prioritize institutional control over personal relationships and medical ethics. Rather than acknowledging the situation honestly and seeking help from family members and medical professionals, she attempted to orchestrate an even more elaborate deception that would discredit Dr. Henderson and minimize William's concerns through carefully constructed explanations. The confrontation between William and his Camilla took place in the throne room, a location that seemed symbolically appropriate for what became a fundamental disagreement about the nature of royal responsibility and family loyalty. William's questions were direct and informed, suggesting that he had received detailed information about his father's condition from palace staff, who were no longer willing to maintain the deception at any cost. King Charles himself, weakened by ongoing health issues and exhausted by the stress of maintaining false appearances, found himself caught between his wife's institutional priorities and his son's personal concerns. The meeting revealed the tragic extent to which the crisis had isolated the monarch from genuine support systems, as he struggled to balance competing loyalties while dealing with serious health challenges that were not being properly addressed. The most shocking moment came when William directly challenged Camilla's handling of the situation, pointing out that her approach was potentially endangering his father's life by preventing proper medical care and creating additional stress through elaborate deceptions. His criticism was respectful but firm, highlighting the conflict between short-term image management and long-term health considerations that palace staff had been observing for weeks. Camilla's response to William's criticism provided the clearest insight yet into her mindset during the crisis. She argued passionately that the monarchy's survival depended on maintaining public confidence through the appearance.